Hello, I'm Rebecca the Maths Lady and welcome to this video which is all about rounding decimal numbers. This is the second video in a pair of videos about decimal numbers. The first one was all about understanding numbers to 3 decimal places, and in it I forgot to explain about how we teach children to order decimal numbers. So I'm going to start with that, and then I'm going to cover rounding to the nearest whole number and rounding to different numbers of decimal places. We'll look at some of the common errors children make and how we overcome those, and how to challenge our children who are flying with this topic. There are 2 videos it's useful to have watched before you watch this one. The first is the one that comes before it on 3 decimal places, so here's a link to that one now. And the second is the first video on rounding, which was all about rounding to the nearest 10, 100 and 1000. And here's a link to that video now if you need it. Okay, let's get started. First of all, to tie up a loose end from last time. When you're asking children to compare decimal numbers and say which is the largest or which is the smallest, there is a shortcut method they can use. And the most important thing is that you don't get to it too soon. You need to do all the work on getting children to deeply understand and conceptualise numbers to 3 decimal places before you let them loose with a recipe or a spell. If you do it the other way around, children will be lazy and they won't bother to do all the understanding part. But once you've done all that other stuff, then you can let the children work on problems and see if they can find a shortcut method. So you could give them a question where you've got some numbers to order and you ask them, how could I put those in order without drawing a diagram? And the shortcut turns out to be that if you write them out lining up the decimal points, then it's like putting them in alphabetical order. As long as those decimal points are lined up, that's going to be the biggest because it's the only number with something in the tens column. So that's going to be first. Then we compare the units column, the ones column, and they're all the same, so that's no good. So we need to move on to the tenths column, the first decimal place, and this number is going to be second, this number is going to be third, and this one is going to be fourth, and we are done. So that's a nice method for them to discover, but not too soon. Okay, rounding with decimal numbers. Let's consider a question like round 2.467 to the nearest tenth, or to 1 decimal place. Make sure you ensure children understand that that's the same degree of accuracy. It's all about understanding where these numbers fit on the number line. So if we make that 2 and that's 3, 2.46 is there, and 7 is going to be slightly closer to 2.47 than 2.46. So it's going to be here, and here these are your tenths. So it is closest to this one, which is 2.1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 2.5, therefore it's 2.5. And we can follow the same process if we're rounding to 2 decimal places. We're saying which of the small sections is it closest to, and that would have turned out to be 2.47. And we could also round it to the nearest whole number, and it's going to be 2 because it's closer to 2 than 3, and we can measure that. So if children have deeply understood their decimal numbers, they're going to be able to cope with this topic. So you might want to work from the front of the class with a counting stick so that everyone can see what you're doing. Or you might want to work in small groups with worksheets. Make sure you listen to every child. And then it's useful to set individual challenges and exercises so you can see which children are struggling and which are flying through and getting it all right and have clearly got a deep understanding of what they're doing. So there will be some worksheets. The fabulous worksheet designer Jeff is working on them just now, and they should be live soon. They will be like the ones that he did on rounding to the nearest 10, 100 and 1000, where there is a number line and children are encouraged to visualise where the number goes on the number line and then write their answer once they've done that. And of course, this reminds us that they need to learn the convention that if it's exactly halfway, you round up. Now, I did say we'd look at a common error, and there is one with this topic. If we go back to the question I looked at before, round 2.467 to the nearest tenth, let's just round it to the nearest whole number. What is 2.467 to the nearest whole number? Well, it's this side of 2.5, so it's closer to 2. So we know the answer is 2. The problem with this is that some children will insist that it's 3, and it's because they're double rounding. They're rounding up the 4 because this number is more than 5. So they round the 4 up to a 5, and then they round this up to 3 because then it's 2.5. So it's really important to plan for that to happen, to make sure you lean into that error, spend some time exploring it, put it back to the children, get them to fight with each other about which is the right answer and why, and make sure you pick up on any children who still haven't got it completely sorted in their head as to what was going on after that discussion. And it's this thing of moving from visualizing what you're doing to an abstract method again. So it's really worth discussing that abstract method. When you're rounding to a certain degree of accuracy, you look at the next digit to that degree of accuracy only. So if you're rounding to 1 decimal place, you look at the second decimal place only. You don't double round because it can all go horribly wrong, and you need to let your children discover that. So in this case, when we're rounding to the nearest whole number, the next digit is the 4, and we look at that only. We ignore all this because we round the 4 up to a 5, we're going completely wrong. And it's only a 4, therefore we do not round up, therefore the answer is 2. But children are only going to really remember that if they've got a secure visual model to access to check their methods that they've learned. Your extension work at this stage, well, you can start to set problems that expose the idea of rounding errors. And that's about going backwards with a rounding problem, knowing what a number's been rounded to and trying to work out what the original number was. So if a piece of material was 5 centimetres long to the nearest centimetre, how long might it actually have been? And it's a wonderful conversation because the minimum length turns out to be 4.5 centimetres. That would round up to 5 centimetres, but anything less wouldn't. But what's the maximum length? Well, if it was 5.5 centimetres, it would round up to 6 centimetres, so it can't be 5.5. So what is it then? And you get into all sorts of interesting discussions about recurring decimals in the end. Children will cover this formally in the future. So at this stage, if you're going to challenge them in this way, just work on specific questions where they can clearly visualise what's going on. You might want to work on questions where the answers could only be whole numbers. So to the nearest 1,000, there are 15,000 people in a football crowd. How many people might there actually have been in the football crowd? What's the minimum number? What's the maximum number? Any question of that type, the children have to be able to imagine the situation, and they must be encouraged to do so. So your takeaways from this video: children can start to find abstract methods for comparing decimal numbers by lining up the decimal points and doing it like alphabetical order, comparing your digits on the left first and then in the next digit and so on. And similarly with rounding, there is this abstract method of looking at the digit after the degree you're rounding to and seeing if it's 5 or more, and if it is, you round up. But you don't want to rush there. You must spend plenty of time exploring, understanding rounding by placing numbers on number lines and visualising the rounding steps and seeing which is closest. And I will be publishing some worksheets on rounding to the nearest whole number, to 1 decimal place and to 2 decimal places shortly. And if you're looking for them, you can either go straight to my Facebook group, to the files section, and the Facebook group is Expert Primary Maths Teaching, or you can go to my website, to the Worksheets page for more information about other places you can find those worksheets, and they're all free. Thank you so much for joining me today and sharing my dream of a world where all primary teachers deeply, deeply understand the maths they're teaching and what they're doing so their children can too. So you can all have the kind of fabulous maths lessons that happen when children are so switched on and everything's making sense and they're just really into what they're doing, and you can see them growing and thriving in front of you. All of them, including the ones who would struggle with other teachers. And I know even if you're a brilliant maths teacher, it won't always be like that because life happens and children don't always behave. And I should talk about that a little bit more in some of my summary videos and my live streams. If you have any questions, please post them in the questions here or come and chat to me live Sundays, 9 o'clock British time. I'd love to hear from you. Bye for now.